Well, you don't have to look around the room too much to realize that we've got an awful lot in common. We're here, we, for the most part, live here in the city of Houston, certainly live in the Houston area. We are believers, we serve the Lord through the local church. There's a whole lot that we have in common, but there is a lot about us that's different too. Some of those differences are pretty obvious. Race, gender, age. Some of the differences between us are not so obvious. Some grew up in fully intact families. Others grew up in very broken homes. Some of us are meat lovers, others are vegans. Some of us grew up in rural areas, others have lived our whole life in the city or the inner city. Some of the differences between us are subtle. And you know, when we are at our best, we value the differences between us. We draw upon the differences between us to make us better together than we are apart. The trouble is, we're not always at our best. I don't know why we seem to have such difficulty getting along with people who are different than us. But it seems like we do. And you know, that's part of the human story. Go all the way back to Cain and Abel, two sons of Adam and Eve. Same family, but they were different. And their differences led to violence. Violence led to death. And it seems that pattern has been with us throughout the ages. The history of the tension between people who are different lies at the heart of why we are together today. And the specific issue that brings us together is the tension between black and white that has come again to the forefront of our national consciousness with the events of the last 24 months. I don't need to rehearse with you things that have taken place in Ferguson, Missouri, not far from where I grew up, in Baltimore, in Dallas, in Baton Rouge. You know, we don't need to rehearse the events of what's taken place. We live in Houston, and the good news is the tension that has escalated so much so in some of these other cities is not a part of our story. But as we saw this past weekend, those tensions are still real and they exist. You know, when a small group of 20 people gather together in front of the NCAACP building and they start protesting and saying, "White lives matter," it reminds us that these tensions are still real and still a part of our experience here. That's why I've asked three men to come this morning and to share their stories, to kind of bring this to our consciousness in a very real and personal way. You know, we all have a story. I have a story. I am a product of the South. I grew up in the 50s and 60s. Nashville was my home. I was raised by my parents and grandparents and a black nanny named Mary Lou. If you want to know a visual image of Mary Lou, imagine Aunt Jemima, that icon on the pancake box and syrup mix, or Aunt Bee, but with black skin. That was Mary Lou. And Mary Lou was always with us. She helped raise my brother and I. There was never a major family celebration that Mary Lou was not a part of. She came along with my grandmother. She fixed the meal for all these extended family occasions. But with Mary Lou, it's a little bit different. She sat at the table with us when we came together to pray. My grandparents, products of the Old South still insisted that Mary Lou sit at the table with us. Now, she didn't stay there very long, because as soon as amen was said, she had to get up and she would start serving again. But so did my grandmother. You see, it wasn't about race. It was about their understanding of their role of being a woman, the matriarchs of the family, and so they would serve us. And when we would gather together to open Christmas presents as a family, Mary Lou was right there in the room with us, opening presents just like everyone else. That's just the way it was. But it was the South, and we were white, and she was a Negro. And Mary Lou was not family. She was there for all the events, but the truth is Mary Lou lived literally across the tracks among very poor folk in a asbestos shingle-sided frame home. When she went home at night, it was different than when she was with us. My folks moved from Nashville. I grew up in St. Louis. And while I was in elementary school and middle school, the civil rights drama was played out in our living room on a television set, appropriately in black and white. I lived in an all-white community. I went to high school. There were 2,997. I don't know why I remember that number, but I do. Almost 3,000 students in the 3 grades of my high school. One of them was black. His name was Cliff, and he was a friend. And it was because he was my friend that I wanted to understand racial tension better. So I read the book, Black Like Me, because I wanted to understand what it was like to be black growing up in America. But the truth is, no matter how many books I read, I can't really, reading is not the same as growing up black in America. I think it's pretty fair to say that at least among the Anglos and maybe beyond the Anglos in this room, we really don't understand what it means to grow up and to be victimized by racial prejudice. We don't understand the scars it leaves, the insecurity that it creates, or the anger that lies just below the surface. I've never had to live with the feeling that I had to work harder than everybody else just to feel like I belonged in the room. Knowing, or in my case, not knowing, is important. I really believe that understanding is at the heart of empathy, and empathy is at the heart of reconciliation. The core of our faith is that God was in Christ reconciling the world unto himself. But in his reconciling work, he also broke down barriers that existed between Jew and Greek, male and female, bond and free. The trouble is, we haven't always gotten that. The early church struggled to get that. Peter was one of the early adapters. He understood what God was about, that God was no respecter of persons. And so he went into the home of Cornelius, and then, he still struggled, but he worked to break down barriers. If only we, the church, had continued to follow Peter's example, we wouldn't be here today. It seems that the work of bringing disparate people together has proven extremely difficult. I'm here, and I hope you're here, because we hope that God will continue to break down the walls that exist between us. Walls that we may have done nothing to create, but walls that we have continued to allow to exist nonetheless. And I think a good place to begin is with understanding. And so earlier this spring, I invited a number of African-American pastors to meet with me and a couple of other leaders at the UBA office, and we talked. Mostly they talked and I listened. And we talked about the racial tensions and what could be done to better integrate black and white churches in UBA. It was a meeting I will always treasure. These men came because they trusted me, and as we talked, we created a safe environment, and a lot of things were said. Not everything was said that needed to be said, I'm sure of that. But many things were said. And now I think it's time to take that conversation to another level, for us to be able to invite you into the conversation. And so I've invited three of those pastors, men I have known for a long time, respect and trust. Men who represent three different eras, men who represent three different experiences, to come and take time to share their story with us, in the hope that in understanding we'll begin to take steps toward coming together. I've invited Dr. John Ogletree, who's the pastor of First Metropolitan Church, and Bryant Lee, who is the pastor of Higher Expectations Church up in Humble, in my community, and Parris Patrick, who is at Agape Community Church, to come and take a few minutes to just share their story, and then we'll talk and probably have some questions along the way. And I hope that this time will be as helpful to you as their time with me was helpful to me. So, pastors, come. Amen. Dr. Ogletree, I'm going to begin with you, and I'm going to ask you if you would just kind of share your story with us of what it's been like, not only growing up Black in America, but being a pastor here in the Houston area.
Okay, be glad to. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Tom, for having this, and we're happy to address this subject. I think it's very needful in this day and time. And I will start off like this. Last year I had the privilege, early this year I had the privilege of speaking at the DEA's annual luncheon for Black History. And the title of my presentation to the DEA was Black Lives Matter. I was speaking to a law enforcement organization, and that was the title of my presentation to them, Black Lives Matter. You see, I grew up in Dallas, and I was a part of the first class and group of students that integrated schools in the Dallas area after the desegregation law came down, and at first, if you recall, we could be bused to the white school. At the black school that I had attended, we had secondhand everything. The books were secondhand. The football uniform secondhand. The basketball uniform secondhand. And it was interesting. We had a brand new school, but everything else was secondhand. When I was bused over to the white school, then I noticed the difference in this world. I said that to say this, that from early on, there has never been an instance in my life where I did not know white lives matter. So I embrace my skin color, my racial background, and I understand the tension that's in the country. But I want you to understand that I see things from the perspective of my background. When I went to college, I went to the University of Texas at Arlington. The mascot at that time was the Rebels. At our football games, they would parade every time the team scored the flag of the Confederacy. For us black students who attended the school, we loved our school, but every time we went to a game, we prayed that we never scored, because we didn't want to see that flag parading by. We knew that white lives matter. I was fortunate enough to, in the school, to become the first black to serve on our student congress as vice president of student congress there at the University of Texas at Arlington. And then I decided to get a master's degree. At that time, the going thing was urban studies. And I got into urban studies program and thought that I would maybe go to look at being a city manager or possibly go in law enforcement. Got in law enforcement. And then I saw some very ugly things. And I was in the Dallas Sheriff's Department and went through the academy, saw some very ugly things there. While I was in the academy, we had different speakers that came and presented different situations for arrest and engagement of citizens. And I will tell you that 99% of the videos that was shown while I was in the academy was of an arrest or an engagement with a black person. Back then, the afros were big, and some of in the black community were wearing dashikis, and I'm sitting there looking at this typology, this stereotypical presentation, and I don't know if they were just unaware of what was being planted, the seeds that were being planted in the minds of those who are going through the academy, but that's what I experienced. It's what I saw. It's what I visualized and digested while I was in the academy. After I graduated serving law enforcement, I saw some things, heard some things. I didn't understand that this was a part of the culture. I was looking through a certain set of eyes, and I started filing complaints that when I saw things, heard things, like, arresting a guy, and you should be back in to process him within 40 minutes, but it's taken an hour and a half. And the whispers there and the laughter of taking the guy and beating up on the old boy before you bring him in. Some things that happen in the jail and the treatment. I started filing complaints. And I had to be pulled aside by another African-American deputy who told me, "You can't do this. You cannot do this. If you do, you'll be in a situation where they will withdraw from you and leave you hanging, and you can get hurt or die." When I was told that, I wanted to be a lawyer, so I decided, hey, it's time to switch gears. And that's what brought me to Houston. I was able to apply for law school and go to South Texas College of Law. Lord blessed me to finish law school on time and pass the ball on the first go round and begin the practice of law. I was in family law, and I tried not to deal with criminal law that much, but I will say this: the law, our system of justice is based upon income, people who can pay, and it's just not a fair system when you look at it. My wife and I have been married now 43 years. We have 4 children. Lord blessed all of our children to graduate from high school, college. All of them are married. We have 11 grandchildren. We moved out into the South area, the Cypress area, and newly in the community. It wasn't as populated with African Americans as it is now. We're now about 17% out in that area. But one of my first experiences out in the area was my boys were playing basketball at one of the neighborhood parks, and the officer came up. They were playing with some of their white classmates. An officer came up and stopped and pulled alongside, and then got out of his car and asked them to come over and asked them what were they doing in this neighborhood. Needless to say, when they came home and told me of that encounter, I was livid. And I called the office there and asked for whoever's in charge and gave them a rundown. That's something I would not tolerate. I was not going to tolerate that in this area. Black Lives Matter. Won't you just listen to me from my perspective? I have never taken a breath in this country without knowing White Lives Matter. I'm a grown man, had my law degree. I serve now in Cypress Fairbanks Independent School District. Years ago, they did a report, just to show you how it affects. They did a report that at one of our department stores, there had been a high incident of arrest of black patrons on suspicion of shoplifting, and several of them had all not just been arrested, but really kind of beat up. And here I am, man of God, educated, and when I went to that department store, I made sure I walked in the center of the aisles where basic traffic flow until I got to the department that I was going to look, and whether I was looking at a shirt, and I made sure my hands were in a non-suspicious area because I did not want to be a victim. As I drive along these streets even today, I pray. So my daughter asked me, with all this stuff broke out, Dad, do you fear getting stopped by a police officer? And I said, No, I don't. I fear being stopped by the wrong police officer. Because there's never a day I don't recall and be reminded and remember that I am an African American in this great country of the United States. That's part of my story.
Thanks, John. Bryant, your story's a little bit different. You and I grew up, not at the same time, but, in the same community there in St. Louis. Share with us a little of your story, because it took a different turn for you.
Yeah, John's story is peaceful. I grew up in North St. Louis, particularly in a neighborhood called Walnut Park. Prior to that, we lived on the west side of St. Louis. To give you some backdrop of the kind of community St. Louis is, and is to this day, is that the community is divided into two sections. Always has been, probably always will be. The north side of the city is pretty much where about 80% of your black population lives. And on the south side of the city is about 80% where your white population lives. So I grew up, I'm a prodigy of the hip-hop generation, the original hip-hop generation, the real hip-hoppers, when the rhymes had a political overtone to them. So I grew up in North St. Louis in a home with two functional alcoholics, my mom and dad. Dad worked really, really hard. Mom worked. My sisters started dating at an early age. My first realization of being black in America and that you could be killed by the police for just being in the wrong place at the wrong time was my niece's father, who was dating my sister at the time. He happened to be in the wrong place and something broke out. He ran in one direction because there was some commotion. Another guy ran in another direction. He had not stolen anything. He didn't have anything on him. Rather than the police arresting him, chasing him, they shot him. They shot him in the buttocks, cut a vein. He died. About 2 weeks prior to that, I can remember riding on his shoulders as a kid, going to the go-karts on the other side of town. So real early in my life, the realization was that the police can kill you and get away with it. By the time that I was 14, my sister now was dating a gentleman who happened to be a Black Panther and part of the Black nationalist movement. Hip-hop was growing up. My dad had already taught me at a very early age, you can never trust the white folk. And so in the neighborhood I grew up in, when we saw white folk, we just knew. You either police, you're a narc, or you a setup. You could be a white woman walking butt naked through the neighborhood and nobody gonna say nothing to you. And that's the neighborhood I grew up in. And so right away there was this tension and really this hatred for people who did not look like us. It was embedded in our culture and in our deal. And so I gravitated because of, I tell people now, almost all Black nationalists lean towards a Islamic bent to some degree, very, very angry, very upset. And Christianity was never a choice for me because Christianity was the blue-eyed, blonde-haired Jesus that when I read the Bible, I didn't see that guy. It was the European deal. And so I was easily drawn into, you had KRS-One, Public Enemy, you had all this radical music going on. And so when being introduced to Black nationalism, it was very easy to gravitate towards that. The men were strong, they were boisterous, they were willing to lay their lives down for the community. And so, they were willing to stand and talk to the police like men. And my whole life, my dad would tell us, hey, no matter what the police do to you, just keep your mouth closed, boy, and get home. And for the first time, I had come across some people that was like, no, if you got to die, you die. So early on in life, I gravitated towards Islam, loved it, found myself moving up the ranks in that culture. And it was just a part. It breathed me. It gave me the outlet that I needed to deal with the issues that I saw. So to give you an example, I came from a neighborhood called Walnut Park. Walnut Park in the 60s was probably a very beautiful, prosperous, lily white neighborhood. When Black folk moved into Walnut Park, white folk moved out. When white folk moved out, guess what? The city services began to decline in Walnut Park. You had less police patrolling. You had less garbage being picked up. The schools began to go into decline. The corner stores began to change. Alcohol and liquor began to spread. Crime and drugs picked up. Planned Parenthood moved into the community. So everything that kills a community was there. And so early on, I realized that there is a big difference between being black and white. Now, Tom mentioned that his background and how he grew up. Here's the funny deal about St. Louis, and Dr. Ogletree talked about segregation. We were bused in 1980 from the north side of St. Louis to the south side of St. Louis to all white schools. In 1980, our schools in St. Louis was still not desegregated. We were still a segregated system. We were busted, and I'll never forget going to middle school and seeing parents holding up signs with racial slurs on them as we were trying to get off the bus. We got off the bus fighting. And so you know what? When we went back to our side of town, the old guys on the block, they made us brass knuckles. They gave us slapjacks to put in our pockets. And they said, no matter what, y'all just get back home. Get back to our side of town. That's the kind of environment that fed hatred and anger. I can remember being pulled over by the police in St. Louis, perfectly legal, forced to lay on the ground while they took me and my cousin's car apart. And then when they finished, guess what they did? See ya, and just drove on off. My whole life, even in Christianity, I've been fortunate to do 20 plus years in the Army, travel the world, be part of white churches, black churches, multicultural churches. But from a leadership perspective, my whole life, I've almost always been the only black guy in the room. In the Army, when I joined the Army, I noticed that most of the leadership, all of the senior leadership, was Anglo. Right? There was a big difference in what you had to do to get into those ranks. And when you got into those ranks, as I climbed up the ranks, I noticed there was less and less and less people that looked like me, did the same job, same work, same everything. So my whole life has been this deal of that there is a difference between being white in America and being black in America. There's the miseducation of African Americans. I like to tell people all the time that the first African Americans did not arrive here as slaves. They arrived here as free people. Mm-hmm. Anthony and Antebellum, they came here as free people. There was a time in America in the early 1600s where black and white people got along, lived together, ate together, slept together, made children together, married together, until slavery was enacted, because slavery was an easy way for white plantation owners to get their crops picked. And the only reason slavery was enacted because you had black and white indigent servants, and what ends up happening that the white servants can just peel on off into the population. Pretty hard for these few black people to peel off into the population, and so it made it an easy catch. So when I think about the way that I grew up and the things that I endured, it fueled my passion to think, man, I don't want to be on the other side, ever on the other side. To this day, my dad is 83 years old. 83 years old, grew up in a place called Shelby, Mississippi. Until this day, he has a strong fear of the police. To this day, he feels like you can be pulled over, handcuffed, and thrown in jail for almost anything. I got two sons, and they're 30 and 20 and 25, and they're tattooed up. I mean, they're the typical young cats. They got tattoos. So my oldest son runs a warehouse. He's a big time warehouse manager. And I can remember about 4 or 5 years ago, there was an incident at a nightclub with him and his now wife, and he gets tasered in the back by the police. So he's a big kid. He's about 5'11". He lifts weight. He's bulky, and he is charged with resisting arrest. He is tased in the back, charged with resisting arrest. So we figured, man, we can get this thrown off. This is just too obvious. It cost us $3,000. So you do need money to fight the criminal justice system. $3,000 in St. Charles County, right, for the officer to finally admit he had not committed a crime. I didn't get my $3,000 back because we had to fight that he didn't get charged with a crime because he would lose his job. My younger son, who's in Fort Hood, Texas, he and I have this conversation all the time. He gets pulled over, and of course they see the tattoos, they see all that. They order him out the car. And once they get his driver's license and his military ID card, they always let him go. And I always ask, why do you think they pull you over? He says, because I look like. He says, now I got some white friends, they got just as many tattoos, but they don't get pulled over. And so the reality for me that my journey through America has always been a journey that says, there is a stark difference between being black and being white. I even experienced it in the church. Now, I love the Church of Jesus Christ. I think it's the greatest institution in the earth. It is the greatest deal happening. It is God's kingdom, embassies in every place in the earth. But when I came to Texas to plant a church, my first realization that there is a disparity even in the church. See, because this is the conversation that we often don't want to have, but even in the church. Martin Luther King, sitting in a Birmingham jail in 1963, writes the letters. The letters from Birmingham jail says that Sunday morning is still the most segregated day in America, right? But when I came here to plant a church, I recognized that as a black church planter with a master's degree, with an education, at that time with over 13 years of military experience, that when I went out to raise resources, I was still seen as a black guy planting a black church in a black community, and you really don't need as many resources as your white Anglo guy who's going to plant a church in a suburban community, and was treated totally different. In fact, a good friend of mine, he and I went to several organizations. He helped me put together the prospectus, the plan, made the exact same pitch. How do you know that, Bryant Lee? Because we rehearsed it together. And here's the reality of it. He walks out with, I'm going to use this term, goo gashes of money. That's one of the Missouri terms, right? To plant a church. And I walk out with, we're going to think about that. So I did all the things that you said I needed to do, but you refused to partner with me, not because you didn't think that lives matter or Jesus wanted to reach all people. You made a decision strictly based on race and whether or not you could communicate and have an effect and an impact of what made you comfortable. So my journey in America and even in the church has been a different journey. We sing the same songs, we preach from the same scriptures, but often we go home with a whole different mindset and thought about race and what we do. I mean, and we're all guilty of it. Black guys will say, man, they sing like white people. I don't know what white people singing is. Or don't preach like a black guy. Or if I come to your church, do I have to hoop? So we have all of these little things that kind of keep us divided, keep us separated, keep us from seeing the bigger and the greater picture. And so my wife and I'll never forget, we were traveling from Fort Riley, Kansas to Southwest Louisiana. We had been married for a few years, and I get pulled over in Louisiana. I'll never forget this. And the state trooper comes up to the car. So this is about 1995, 96, and he says, where you going, boy? Right away, I lost it. I say, first of all, I ain't your son, and ain't no boys in this car. And the whole time, Dee Dee is slapping my leg, we're in the middle of nowhere. She's trying to let me know, hey, just play along, right? And the old me just rolls up. I said, man, either give me a ticket and shut up or keep moving. Them cats kept me there for 2 hours. I learned then that when the police pull you over, hey, just shut your mouth and get them what they want so that you can keep going. But he didn't walk up and say, sir, mister, where are you going, boy? I'm a grown man, and at that time had been on my first combat tour, decorated veteran, and with a tag on the back of my car that says U.S. Army, and you address me as boy. As boy. I hated going, my family's from Mississippi, I hated going to Mississippi because my aunties would always tell us, when it get dark now, y'all be in the yard. When it get dark now, y'all be in the yard. Don't go across that field. We had all these rules we had to stick in, And if they saw us playing with the white kids, come back over here now. We don't want no trouble. This ain't 1950, 1960, 1970. This 1980. 1980. 1980. See, there's a huge problem in America. Even in the community Tom and I live in, our church works with a lot of Title I schools. I challenged the school district because I asked them, I said, it seems obvious to me that we have a problem because all of the black and brown kids seem to end up in the same schools. And it seems like whenever too many black and brown people live in a certain area, we redraw the district lines to make sure that they all end up in the same schools. How is that possible? How is it possible that when you look at our district school lines that we got all these squiggly lines? We got kids living on this side of the road, like where Tom lives. We cut that out, and those kids can go to that high school, which happens to be the newer high school with all the stuff. But on that side of the road, where the homes are a lot less expensive, these kids go to this. So it's that constant battle in America that, you know what? There's a difference when you walk into a room, you walk out of a room. And so my experiences has just been, you know what? It's been a constant reminder that you are African American. Constant reminder that you're an African American. I remember we could not get a place to rent for a long time in the city of Humble because I would call people, tell them about our church, and we would go to the place, and miraculously between the phone call that morning and the team getting there that evening, it had been rented. In fact, a good friend of mine right now, they just built out a 12,000 square foot space at a space that we tried to rent for years. They're an Anglo church plant. Got it like that. I think the danger that we have in our culture, especially in the church, is that we want to turn a blind eye to what's obvious, to the elephant that's in the room and that's in the culture, that we have to do some serious work when it comes to race relations, not just in the culture, but in the church.
All right, let's kind of move, John and I are products of the 50s and 60s, and, you're bringing us up to the 80s, but Parris, you're the youngest one up here. You grew up here, and your experience and your very painful story takes place much more recently.
So I grew up in a military family. Every man in my family has served in the military. I'm the only male that did not go in the military. Shame on me. I'm not one to be told what to do. And so I just, no, I'm doing my own thing. I don't like that. And so I always didn't like that. And so I said, no, I'm doing my own thing. And so I chose football instead of military. But grew up in a military family. My father was a drill sergeant, taught martial arts and war hand-to-hand combat in the military, served in Vietnam and all of those things. And so my dad grew up in the Watts riots, was young in the Watts riots, was a Black Panther, my father was. And by the time he had children, he had accepted Christ on a tour in Greece, had my older brother when he was in Greece, and moved to Louisiana where I was born. And shortly after I was born, we moved to Houston. My dad got a job with E.F. Hutton. And when E.F. Hutton speaks, you listen. Some of you guys may remember that. Was a stockbroker, very successful stockbroker, invested personal wealth, which was very hard. He was the only black man that had that job in the 80s. Anyway, we moved into a community in Sugar Land right here off of Williams Trace and Highway 6. And up until that point, I was raised that I was just a human being. My father taught me nothing about race, even though he had that experience of being in Watts riots and being in all those things. Taught us nothing about race. I would even largely say I didn't even know I was black until this event happened. I was just a human. My grandmother is white. And so my mother is half white. And so I didn't see any of these things. But when I was in school in the 3rd grade, my dad always taught his children to be very astute. I've always been very astute, an avid reader, an avid student. And so by the time I was in 3rd grade, I was well beyond my level and was out producing any of the children in my class. I was one of only 3 black children that went to the school at the time, or at least in my class. I'm not sure about the school. And so I was passing these math tests. I've always been very good at math, specifically statistics. But in third grade, you don't do statistics, but very good at math. And one day, my teacher calls me to the front of the room, in front of everybody. And she says, "Parris, you're cheating." And I said, "No, ma'am, I'm not cheating. I'm passing these tests." And she says, "No, you have to be cheating. Niggers aren't good at math." And I look and I'm like, "Well, what's a nigger?" I did not know, never heard the word, never used it in my house. My dad would slap us on the side of the head if we said but or Those words are not to be used in the drill sergeant Patrick's home. You had to very clearly and succinctly express yourself in his house. And so we were very clear on words, and that word was never used. And so I come home and I say, "Daddy, what's a nigger?" And for the first time in my entire life, my dad, to my knowledge, my dad has only cried 3 times. And that was when E.T. and Elliot got sick together. 1, he cried when Mufasa died. 2, and he cried when I asked him that question. And I didn't know why he was crying. Just he was crying like a baby. And he sat me down and he explained to me why I heard that word and what it was. He explained to me what my grandfather experienced in Birmingham, Alabama, what he experienced growing up in school with segregation, and now what I experienced in the 3rd grade. And so my father, of course, being a drill sergeant in the military, almost similar to Bryant, saying he wasn't going to accept what happened to his son, or I'm sorry, Pastor Ogletree, my dad goes to the school and does not make any quiet scene about it, what has happened. And no, they're very clear on it. They even tell me, no, it's been statistically proven, but they didn't say nigger to my dad. They said black people. Black people aren't good at math. In fact, every time your son now takes a math test, he has to do it under the supervision of the principal, and I did. And I begged my dad, take me out of the school, and my dad says, "No, you're not getting out of the school. You're going to stay there." And for the life of me, I didn't know why my father wanted me to stay in that environment, but he did, and I understand it now. My father would explain to me that what's happening, we're experiencing the symptoms of brokenhearted people. It's showing up in the form of race. It's showing up in people not liking my skin. But what is really going on behind the scenes is brokenheartedness. Jesus didn't come to end racism. He came to heal the brokenhearted. And my father would explain to me these things. And so I would begin to go to school and realize my principal's brokenhearted, my teacher's brokenhearted. The other kids who laugh when she calls me nigger, they're brokenhearted. They need to meet Jesus. And so it began to be easier to go to school, even though I had to take every test under the supervision of a principal right here in Sugar Land. 2 or 3 months later, after this event, I'm coming home from school. My mother at this time would pick me up from school because I would get made fun of on the bus and all these things. And so my mother would bring me home to school. My older brother, who's 4 years older than me, he liked white girls. And no problem with that. My grandmother's white, so my family didn't think anything of it. Okay, son, they're beautiful, she's pretty, but whatever. Anyway, the girl that he happened to like was in the Klan. Her brother was a Klansman right there in Sugar Land, Texas. I don't know if I said that yet, but Sugar Land, Texas. And so my mother's bringing me home, and we get in the driveway, and I see this guy, bloody. And my mom doesn't see him yet, but I see him. He's right there, and he's walking down the street, blood everywhere. And then I hear that noise. That noise that all mothers make when they see a horrific scene. It's an unhuman noise. Some of you mothers may know what that sounds like. You can't replicate it, but it's a noise that a mother would make when they see their child in a horrific situation. That's the noise I heard. And then I know that's my brother, Jason. That's him. And we go to get him, and my mother brings him to the car, and I realize his ear is gone. And not only is his ear gone, his hand has been cut in half from the middle of his digit down to his wrist, and it's hanging. We don't know what happened yet. My mother goes into nurse. My mother was in the military. She was an Army nurse in the military. And so she goes into Army mode action and throws him in the car, and we head straight to the hospital while my dad is on the way. And so it wasn't until later that night we find out that the bus driver stops the bus and allows the Klan to take my brother off the bus in Sugar Land, Texas. Did I say that already? I don't know if but right here in Sugar Land. And he gets taken off the bus and gets taken to some place where no one can see this happen, and they cut his ear off, all the while telling him, "Nigger, leave, nigger, leave, nigger, leave." They cut his hand. They tried to cut his hand in half, off, but for whatever reason weren't successful in doing it. So they tell us, if you can find the ear, we can reattach it. So we say, Jason, take us to where it happened, and we get, well, not we, but somehow they got the ear. They put it back on, and it healed. He had a scar. His hand healed, had a scar. While he's healing, by the way, while all this is happening, we're pressing charges. Nothing's happening. We press charges. The cops come over, and the cops ask us, well, what did he do? He must have done something to warrant this response. He did nothing but like this girl. Later, we found out the cops knew exactly who it was. The cops knew the children, the house, the very house that the boy lived in. The cops knew where it was. And they did nothing. All the while, my father's teaching his boys, son, this is from a brokenhearted situation. These people need Jesus. What you're experiencing is the symptoms of a brokenhearted culture, of a brokenhearted world. It's coming out in the symptom of race. Yes, racism exists, systematic racism exists, cultural racism exists, but those are symptoms of when people don't have Jesus healing their heart. This is how my father would speak to us. And so my brother still has the cast on his hand. No less than a month later, his ear is still healing. Where my dad at this point was teaching a Bible class. My dad is also a pastor. He was a seminary professor at that time, teaching a class over in the community that we lived in. And we're in my mother's room watching TV. I don't know what was on the TV, but the lights go out. And all of a sudden, I hear that noise that my mother made when Jason got hurt. And I know by this time that noise means something's wrong or is about to be wrong. And all of a sudden, there's an orange glow coming through my mother's bedroom window. And this time in Sugar Land, Texas, all the houses were wood shingled. I don't think you have much of that nowadays, but our home was wood shingled house in those days. This was 87, 88, almost 90. And my mother runs to the window and pulls the window open, and the garage is on fire. By this time, my little sister was born, Pilar, and my mother tells Jason, who has one functional hand, go get Pilar, I'll get Achilles, who's my little brother. Parris, go and tell Jim what happened. This was in the days when alarm systems were almost brand new. There was a button on your alarm you can push to call the fire department. And so I ran to Jim's house, who was a white family who really enjoyed having us live next door to them. Our families ate together. We did a lot of things together. And so I ran to Jim's house and told Jim, could you push the button? And by the time he pushes the button, the entire home is engulfed by now. And on my way back to my house is when I realized there's a car across the street with people yelling outside of it, get out of our neighborhood, you niggers. And it was the first time, if you can believe me or not, it was the first time out of all of this situation that I actually hated someone back. I never before had the emotion of, I hate you. But that was the first moment that I remember experiencing hate. I hated them at that moment. I did. They peeled rubber and go off, and for the first time, my community comes out. Of course, Jim's family comes out, but all the other community who's seen all this happen, they saw what happened to my brother, they saw what happened to my house right before they burned our house down. The week before, we're coming home from church. My home church is McGee Chapel Missionary Church over on Highway 6, and we're coming home. And we drive in our driveway, and the whole back of our house was tarred and feathered. Where you get that much tar, I do not know. Where you get that many feathers, I do not know. but the whole back of our house was tarred and feathered. And I remember my father's response. He laughed. And he said, well, boys, let's clean up the back of our home. We cleaned it up and acted like nothing happened. And we prayed for the boys that did it. We knew who it was. We knew where they lived. We prayed for them. A week later, they set our house on fire. Called the fire department. Everyone comes out. They try to help us with stuff. We lived with our next door neighbors for a week or so until my dad found another place to live. Fire department says, yes, it's arson. Do you know who said it? Yeah, it was them. We'll launch an investigation. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. From that moment that I started experiencing that hate in my heart, it started in me, I guess from that day, a defense mechanism. I began to be very angry. My temper, the ability to remain patient stopped at that moment. It's better now. It's healed now. But I began to be very angry at the world, angry at everything. Began to fight in school. Began to fight my brothers because no one was going to do that to me. I'm not going to get cut like my brother got cut. In fact, if you come at me, I'll cut you first. That was my mindset. And my father, the whole time, would be helping me get over this situation until one day he helped me get introduced to Jesus in a new way, in that way that would heal my heart. And it healed my heart. Just recently, last year, my family now, we live in Fort Bend, not in Sugar Land. We live closer to the A-Leaf part of Fort Bend. I have a 10-year-old Cadillac that I keep looking good. I wash it and do the tires, but it's 10 years old. Driving out of my own neighborhood that I've lived in for almost 9 years. And haven't experienced that much racism, but this time was different. I am an avid motorcycle rider, and so I had a motorcycle mechanic come to my house, and his payment was, give me some dinner at the end of the day, take me home. I said, okay, cool, I'll take that. So worked on my motorbike and was in the process of taking him home about 11:30 at night or so, and come out of my neighborhood, and I did a California stop. Okay, you got me. California stop is when you roll on through. So I'm expecting to get a ticket for running a stop sign. Okay, good, I got it. I'm responsible. But instead, the cop comes to the door, and what I experienced was, boy, how did you afford this car? This was last year. And my response was, with my job. You know, I grew up with Dr. Patrick. I'm not afraid of anyone. I'm not afraid of any living man, woman, or child, or beast on this planet. And so my father never taught me how to speak to cops. My father said, don't bow down. Treat people like human beings, but you're not going to get ran over. You're not a doormat. And I said, I paid for it with my job. Would you like to know where I work? And he said, give me your driver's license and ID. And I quickly responded to him, am I getting a ticket today? Is there an issue? Matter of fact, why don't you call your supervisor so we can explain the question you just asked me? What's your badge number, by the way? And I just started spitting all this stuff out. And by the end of the day, by the end of that encounter, he just told me, don't roll through stop signs anymore. I said, I won't. And the gentleman in my car, who's much older than me, in his 50s, he asked me a question. And he said, weren't you afraid? Because he didn't say a word. And he asked me, weren't you afraid to talk to the officer like that? And I said, no, I wasn't afraid to talk to the officer like that. My father never taught me to be afraid of any human on this planet. And so I don't live in fear. And my father taught me that when people treat you like that, it's because of a broken issue in their heart. And when we allow that to happen, the broken issue becomes getting shot. The broken issue becomes getting pulled out of my car, searching my trunk, maybe getting evidence planted. But instead, if you react to the situation directly to show him what you're doing is wrong, where's your supervisor? What's your badge number? What's the number I'm going to call? I'm not going to let you do this right now, today. You stop the issue. And so my experience has been more violent, direct against my life. My son has now experienced it, similar to Pastor Bryant's son, playing basketball in his own neighborhood at one of the schools The schools open up their parks in our neighborhood, playing basketball. My son has dreadlocks longer than mine. His come to about his shoulder. No tattoos. He's only 16. But same question. Why are you playing basketball here? In fact, he was playing basketball with a lot of other races. It wasn't just him, but the two black kids that were playing basketball were the only two asked to come here. My son has a cell phone, so he called me, Dad, this just happened, and as fast as I can run, I figured I can get there faster running than driving. I should have drove, but because the school's in our neighborhood. As fast as I can get there running, the cop was gone. And so I got the firsthand account of what happened, and they were the only two asked to come here. And why were they playing basketball here, and where do they live? I said, did you tell him where we live? He said, yeah. I said, good, I hope he comes. Did you get his badge number? I taught my son, did you get his badge number? Did you ask for a supervisor? Yes, he gave it to me. I called. Of course, nothing happened. But these are the things that are alive and well today.
They are.
They're alive and well today.
Well, you all took kind of a bold step in being a part of Union Baptist Association. And two of you have already served as moderator for UBA. And Parris, don't be surprised if your day doesn't come sometime in the future. And I really appreciate that. I appreciate your boldness, your willingness to be a part, your willingness to serve. And I realize even that hasn't always been well received by your peers. We all acknowledge this is a complicated issue. It's not going to be easily solved. We know that. And we only have a couple of minutes left, but in the time we have left, as pastors in UBA who have been a part of the association, I love to say we're 1/3 Anglo churches and 1/3 African-American, 1/3 folks who speak a language other than English. We're a very diverse association. But in some ways we're still divided. And we're divided by language, divided by race. What would you say, since this is the church in black and white, as pastors of African-American churches, what would you say to the white church that we need to be attentive to, or we need to do, if you would just take 1 or 2 minutes, and I want you to just talk to us and say, here's what I'd like to see from the white church.
Well, I like to see a full recognition of all people, black people, as people made in the image of God. Go back to the Bible. I think if you go back to the Bible, honor, love, respect people as should be understood as a biblical mandate. To embrace history and understand history. There were 240-something years of slavery. After that, there were 100 years of black codes and Jim Crow laws. 1964 Civil Rights Bill passed, 1965 Voting Rights Bill passed. It's no way you can say that a people who went through all of that should now have risen and should be equal, and there are no problems in America. They should be all right by now. It's no way. The other thing is there's been a tragedy happening in our country in the politicalization of our faith. Our evangelical conservatives have reduced sin to three sins: abortion, homosexuality, and same-sex marriage. Where the biblical revelation reveals, read throughout the biblical revelation, reveals that sin is much broader than that. It also includes racial hatred. How do you treat the poor? Mass incarceration. The system now that they're making money off the poor, payday loans, human trafficking. There's a whole broader spectrum of sin than to reduce it to three things. If you, this political party, this is what they believe. So this is the guy. This is, please, read the biblical revelation. Read what God says about justice. It's a part of God's nature. And justice means making things right. When you read in the Hebrew, the same word for righteousness is the same word for justice. They interchange. There can be no righteousness without justice. You can read Deuteronomy chapter 24, Deuteronomy chapter 10, Amos, that bold statement of Amos chapter 5 verse 24. Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a never-ending stream. Micah 6 and 8. What does the Lord require? He to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before your God. What does Jesus say? When Jesus opened his mouth after he came out of the river Jordan, after all the tests of Satan, when he says what my mission is to preach the gospel to the poor, to set the captives free, to give sight to the blind, and to set liberty to those who are oppressed. Read Matthew 25, where Jesus says, hey, me, naked, me, in prison, me, hungry. When you've done it to me, you've done it. You've done it to those, you've done it to me. Read what Jesus says in Luke 10 about the Good Samaritan. I mean, I could go on and on. This politicalization of the faith, all these ditto heads, and all these people, I mean, when we look at that and we understand, hey, are they reading the same Bible that I'm reading? White privilege is real. I still tell my boys when they leave the house at night, they're grown. All three of my sons are preachers, got children. I still tell them to be careful, obey all the speed, have your license and your insurance handy so no one mistakes that you're going for something else. It's real, and I would suggest begin having relationships. Everything hinges on relationships. Getting to know a person of another color, to hear their story, let them hear yours, to really fellowship. That's what's going to have to happen in America.
Thank you, Pastor. Brian?
I think we often mistake social justice and biblical justice as being one and the same. You know, social justice, while it's very good and deals with the social ills of our culture, our society, does not deal with the issues of biblical justice that Pastor John just very eloquently laid out. Here's what I would say to our white churches. Just by nature or by virtue of being white, you have the power. Undeniable. You have the power, the ability, and the authority. The question that I would ask is, do you have the affection? Do you have the courage? Do you have the integrity to do something about the injustices that we face every day as a nation, as a culture, and in the church world? So here's my application. Let's not just squat pulpits so we can get cool news articles. Let's do life together. Let's take the power that you have and the voice that you have and the relationships you have and the doors that you can open and through the relationships that you have with people that don't look like you, whether black, white, brown, or yellow, and let's leverage that influence for the good of the kingdom. Ultimately, I like what Pastor Parris says, we have a lot of broken-hearted people. But if we allow our culture and what we believe about Jesus to be politicized between Republican or Democrat or white or black lives or blue lives or whatever the latest hashtag is going to be, then we've missed the mark. But I would challenge the white church to become comfortable and become uncomfortable. Become comfortable with becoming uncomfortable. And see, here's the reality. We've always had to cross the other side of the tracks. But it's a survival skill. We have always had to be the people going on the other side of the tracks. It's a survival skill. Why? Because always on the other side of the tracks, there are more resources, and we need those resources. My challenge is, why don't you guys cross the tracks? That's where true reconciliation happens. It's when you cross the tracks. He made the reference to the Good Samaritan. The injured man had no, he laid there with people walking past him. It says a priest and a Levite representing people in the church at various levels of influence. And finally, this Samaritan comes. And here's the reality. He came. He didn't wait for him to get on his own 2 feet. Because here's the reality. There's this whole argument in America, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Nobody pulls themselves up by their bootstraps. Not a single one of us. We all need help. 91 another scriptures in the text. 90. No. Why has God given you influence? I'm convinced that he made me black for a reason. He made you white for a reason. But if God has given you influence, it's for a reason bigger than Sunday morning and keeping the status quo. And so I would just say to the white church is be more intentional, not just for Racial Reconciliation Sunday, not so we can put some cool pictures on our website, not so we can take some pictures outside the jail, but for the long-term effects of what it means to be Christ-centric, for the long-term effect of what it means to be the body of Christ, for the long-term effect of what it means to a place like Houston that's now the most diverse place in America. Be intentional, but use the resources, the abilities, the influence, and the time that you have and the positions that you're in to make the greatest impact, to do the greatest good towards this deal of racial reconciliation. Then I believe, like the writer says in Ephesians, we can see the one new man that God talked about.
Thank you. Parris, I hate to, just 1 minute, man.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I personally, let me disclaimer this is not the opinion of the UBA Association, all that. This is my belief that there is no white church or black church. I believe there are issues. It's very clear. There are racial issues in our country that show up in the church. But when Jesus says, let it be done on earth as it is in heaven, when we get to heaven, Jesus is he's not going to say, all right, the black church, y'all come on up, white church. That's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. And so why are we doing it now? That's just where I stand on it. Why are we doing it now? I believe the issues don't need to be in the church. There is no white church. There's no black church. There are issues. But if we handle those issues the way Jesus said handle them, they won't be handled with any skin color involved. There'll be justice issues. There'll be, that's not right. Let's go fix it. That's not right. Let's go fix it. Skin color won't matter. Because what matters is that's not right. Let's fix it. Because that's the way heaven operates. Heaven doesn't operate based on black people are being mistreated. No, people are being mistreated. And that's what our Father in heaven wants to be done on earth. And so I personally don't appreciate the terms black church, white church. I know that they're necessary to put adjectives behind things. But that's not where I stand. I am a member of the body of Christ, and Jesus looks at me and calls me his bride, not his black bride. And so that's how I regard myself, and that's how I believe that this should be done.
Thank you, Parris. John, let's take just a moment. You've brought some resources you want to recommend.
Yes, one I don't have is the new Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. It's a must-read. Timothy Keller, a well-noted author, has written a book called Generous Justice. An old classic is Jesus and the Disinherited by Howard Thurman. And then Mark Laverton, the president of Fuller Theological Seminary, has written a book, The Dangerous Act of Loving Your Neighbor, Seeing Others Through the Eyes of Jesus. And then John Piper, with a foreword by Tim Keller, Bloodlines. Very, very good reading. Just some suggestions.
Thank you. I appreciate so much you coming and sharing your story. I realize it takes a lot of courage to do that, and for you all to be a part of Union Baptist Association, to take a lead out in the association. So I just want to say thank you for being here today and for the role you play in UBA.
Thank you, Tom. I think it took a lot of courage for you to have a day like this. Thank
you. Back to what Parris said, you just do what's right. And I certainly don't think this is by any means the end of the conversation. I think this is just the beginning of an important conversation that we need to keep going. And I appreciate your word about biblical justice, that this needs to be at the forefront. Not all those other things that tend to get in the way of our decision making. I've tried to raise our boys. Most important book in the world is the Bible. And read it, integrate it into your life, live it, teach it, share it. And I hope that that's what we'll do. The church has, unfortunately, a checkered history regarding race. Some have used the Bible to promote it. Others have given their lives for freedom and to liberate slaves and to level the playing field between us. I hope going forward we'll turn to the Scripture. We'll be people of the book, and we'll follow what it says, that our God is no respecter of persons, and that Jesus died on the cross for all of us, and in Christ we are one. Thank you. God bless you.